Stop for a moment and notice what you're doing right now. Are you waiting for proof? Are you checking circumstances? Are you looking at the world and asking, has it changed yet? That habit right there is the very thing delaying everything you want. Because the moment you check reality, you step out of creation and into reaction. You hand your power to appearances and quietly agree that the outer world knows more than your inner knowing. But creation was never meant to be observed. It was meant to be assumed. The moment you stop checking, you step into a higher position, one where fulfillment is not hoped for, but occupied. This is where change begins. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now, most people believe life happens to them. They wake up, observe circumstances, react emotionally, and then wonder why the same patterns keep repeating. What they do not realize is that reality is not leading the dance, it is following. The outer world is not the origin of experience, it is the afterimage of inner assumptions already accepted as true. What you see around you is not creation in progress. It is creation completed, but completed in the past. Every condition, relationship, delay, or success you encounter is the result of a state of consciousness you once occupied, knowingly or unknowingly. Reality, then, is not a cause to be feared or fought. It is an effect to be understood. When you mistake effect for cause, you give away your power. You look at circumstances and say, because this is happening, I feel this way. But in truth, the feeling came first, and the circumstance followed. The world only mirrors what has already been impressed upon consciousness. It does not initiate. It reflects. This is why reacting to reality never changes it. Reaction simply feeds the same state that produced the condition in the first place. You argue with appearances, try to fix outcomes, force action, or wait for something external to shift before you allow yourself peace. But effects do not correct themselves. Only the cause can do that. The cause is always within. The moment you accept that reality is an effect, a profound shift occurs. You stop asking, how do I change the world? And begin asking, what state am I living from? This question moves you from struggle into authorship. You are no longer a character in the story. You are the one writing it. Understanding this also explains why checking reality is so destructive. When you constantly observe the outer world to see if things have changed, you are treating the effect as if it were the cause. You are asking the mirror to move first, and a mirror does. The inner assumption must change before the reflection can. This does not mean denying what you see. It means reinterpreting its meaning. Circumstances are not instructions, they are indicators. They show you what state has been dominant, not what must continue. Once you grasp this, appearances lose their authority. They become information, not commands. You stop reacting emotionally to delays. You stop panicking at temporary contradictions. You stop celebrating too early or despairing too deeply. Why? because you know the cause is already decided and the effect is merely catching up. Living from this understanding brings calm, a deep, grounded calm. You no longer need constant reassurance because you are no longer waiting for reality to give permission. You give permission first within yourself and allow the world to rearrange accordingly. This is also why effort without inner alignment fails. Action taken from fear, doubt, or urgency only reproduces more of the same. You may move faster, try harder, or do more. But if the inner cause remains unchanged, the outer effect has no choice but to repeat. Change the state, and behavior will naturally follow. Change the assumption, and action becomes effortless. Change the cause, and the effect must obey. When you truly understand that reality is an effect, patience becomes natural. You stop demanding instant proof because you understand the law of reflection. You know there is a delay, not because something is wrong, but because effects must follow causes in sequence. You do not dig up a seed every day to see if it is growing. Instead, you remain faithful to the inner decision. You occupy the feeling of being the one who already has, already is, already knows. And from that position, life begins to reorganize quietly, subtly, inevitably. Reality does not resist you. It only reflects you. Once you stop treating the world as the source, you stop being controlled by it. You move inward, claim authorship, and live from the cause rather than the effect. And when that happens, checking reality becomes unnecessary, because you finally understand its role. It was never there to lead you. It was always there to follow. Most people believe they are being careful, logical, or realistic when they constantly check their circumstances. They think observing reality keeps them grounded. But in truth, checking is not awareness, it is confession. Every time you look to the outer world and ask, has it changed yet? You are declaring silently and powerfully that you believe you do not yet have what you want. Checking is not neutral. It is a state. When you check for proof, you are not affirming fulfillment. You are affirming absence. You are living from the position of someone who is waiting, hoping, measuring, and doubting. And the state of waiting can only reproduce more waiting. The outer world has no choice but to reflect the inner stance you are holding. Fulfillment ends the need to check. Think about it. You do not check for what you already own. You do not wake up every morning to see if your name still belongs to you. You do not constantly verify whether your past is real. Certainty eliminates surveillance. When something is assumed as done, the mind naturally rests. Checking arises only when the end is not occupied. This is why so many people feel exhausted in their inner work. They imagine for a moment, feel hopeful, and then immediately turn back to the outer world to see if anything has moved. That movement back and forth between assumption and observation fractures faith. It sends mixed signals. It tells the mind, I don't really believe this yet, and the world obeys that message. The habit of checking often disguises itself as responsibility. People say, I'm just being realistic, or I just want to know where I stand. But creation does not respond to realism. It responds to assumption. Reality is not persuaded by logic. It is shaped by what you consistently accept as true. When you check, you are not standing in the end. You are standing outside it, looking in. The deeper issue is trust. Checking is what the mind does when it does not trust consciousness to do its work. It wants reassurance. It wants evidence before belief. But the order is reversed. Belief precedes evidence. Occupancy precedes visibility. To stop checking is not to ignore life. It is to stop giving authority to appearances. It is to say, I know what I have accepted, and I will not ask the mirror to confirm it prematurely. This shift is uncomfortable at first. The ego panics when it loses its familiar role of monitoring and controlling. It fears that if it stops checking, something will be missed. But nothing is missed when the end is lived from. In fact, things begin to move faster because resistance dissolves. Checking introduces tension. Tension slows manifestation. When you stop checking, you relax into the state of fulfillment. Your inner conversations change. You no longer ask why or when. You move differently. You respond instead of react. And these subtle shifts are not accidental. They are evidence that you have changed states. The outer world responds not to your effort, but to your rest. This is why letting go works, not because you stop wanting, but because you stop checking. You stop hovering over the seed. You allow it to grow in its own appointed way. Letting go is not forgetting. It is trusting the cause you have set into motion. Once you understand this, discipline becomes simple. Every time you feel the urge to check, you recognize it as a signal not to look outward, but to return inward. You gently reoccupy the end. You remind yourself, I am already the one who has, and that reminder is enough. Checking reality is a habit formed by past disappointments, delays, and conditioning. But habits dissolve when understanding replaces effort. The moment you see that checking equals lack, the habit begins to lose its grip. You no longer fight the urge. You outgrow it. And as checking fades, certainty deepens, not loud certainty, not forced confidence, but quiet knowing, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that does not argue, the kind that simply is. From that state, fulfillment becomes inevitable. Stop checking, not because you must, but because you no longer need to. Most people think of the end as a future event, something that will happen to them when the right conditions appear. They imagine fulfillment as a destination reached through time, effort, or favorable circumstances. But the end is not a point in time. It is a state of consciousness, available the moment you choose to occupy it. The end does not arrive. you arrive at the end. When you understand this, manifestation stops feeling like a chase. You are no longer running toward a result. You are stepping into an identity. The question shifts from how do I get what I want to who would I be if it were already done. And that question carries you directly to the cause. A state of consciousness is not an affirmation you repeat or a visualization you strain to hold. It is a position you inhabit. It is the lens through which you perceive, interpret, and respond to life. When you live in the end, your reactions change, not because you are controlling them, but because the foundation beneath them has changed. This is why living from the end feels natural once entered. It does not require constant effort. Effort belongs to wanting, not to being. The struggle people feel is not the end resisting them. It is the old state trying to survive. The end begins with acceptance. You do not force yourself to believe. You decide what is true and allow your inner world to align. This decision is subtle but final. It does not argue with appearances. It does not need approval. It simply chooses the state and rests there. The moment you occupy the end, time loses its grip on you. Waiting dissolves, because waiting only exists when fulfillment is imagined as future. In the end, there is nothing to wait for. There is only expression. This is why techniques fail when misunderstood. They are not meant to create the end. They are meant to help you enter it. When used correctly, they guide you into the feeling of already being. When used incorrectly, they become rituals of hoping. Living from the end means you stop asking how it will happen. The how belongs to the world of effects. The end belongs to the world of causes. When you try to manage both, you step out of your role as creator and back into the role of observer. The end does not require you to know the path, only to accept the destination as current fact. From this state, your inner conversations change automatically. You no longer speak to yourself as someone seeking permission. You speak as someone who assumes legitimacy. Your thoughts become quieter, simpler, more direct. There is less mental noise because there is less resistance. You are no longer convincing yourself. You are expressing yourself. This is why persistence is not repetition, but residence. To persist, in the end, is to return to it gently whenever you notice you have drifted, not with frustration, not with fear, but with familiarity, like returning home. The end also brings emotional maturity. You stop swinging between hope and disappointment. You stop assigning meaning to every external shift. You understand that moods, reactions, and circumstances are passing waves, not indicators of truth. Truth lives in the state you occupy. As this understanding deepens, your desire begins to feel different. It no longer feels heavy or urgent. It feels complete. Even before it appears, it carries the emotional tone of fulfillment. That tone is the signal the world responds to, and the world always responds. Living from the end does not make you passive. It makes your action inspired rather than forced. When action arises from the end, it feels obvious, timely, uncomplicated. You are not trying to make something happen. You are cooperating with what already is. This is the quiet power of the end. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention, but it governs everything. Once assumed, it begins to externalize through natural means, without struggle or strain. You do not chase the end. You become it. And once you do, reality reorganizes itself around your being, because consciousness always comes first. Most people believe creation requires effort, action, and constant mental activity. They think change comes from pushing, repeating, forcing, or endlessly doing something to make life move. But true creation does not begin in motion. It begins in stillness, not the stillness of inactivity, but the stillness of inner certainty. Stillness is not emptiness, it is completion. When the mind stops reaching, searching, and checking, it enters a state where creation can occur naturally. Inner stillness is the absence of doubt, not the absence of thought. It is what remains when the desire has been internally fulfilled and no longer needs mental justification. This is why the most powerful shifts often happen when you stop trying. Effort is the language of lack. It signals that something is missing and must be acquired. Stillness, on the other hand, is the language of possession. It says, "This is already mine, so there is nothing to chase." And the outer world responds more quickly to this quiet confidence than to frantic striving. When you live from the end, stillness appears on its own. You no longer need to convince yourself or rehearse outcomes. The mind settles because it has received its answer. That answer is not logical proof. It is inner knowing. This knowing is creative. From stillness, your thoughts slow down and become selective. You no longer entertain every fear or possibility. You allow thoughts to pass without attachment. This is not suppression, it is authority. You are no longer ruled by mental noise because you are anchored in a decided state. Inner stillness removes resistance. Resistance is not the presence of obstacles. It is the inner struggle against what is already accepted as true. When you are divided, wanting something while doubting it, energy scatters. Stillness unifies attention, and unified attention is power. This is why silence within is more effective than endless affirmations spoken from anxiety. Words repeated without stillness carry effort. Words arising from stillness carry conviction. One calm assumption outweighs 1,000 desperate statements. Stillness also changes how you experience time. Urgency fades. Pressure dissolves. You stop counting days and measuring progress. This is not because you have given up, but because you have arrived internally. Time only feels heavy when you are waiting. Stillness ends waiting. From this place, trust becomes natural. You do not trust because you are trying to be spiritual or positive. You trust because there is nothing left to doubt. The decision has been made, the state has been entered, and the mind has settled into agreement. This is why inspired action emerges from stillness, not when action arises from inner calm. It feels obvious and timely. There is no force behind it, no urgency, no fear of missing out. You move when it feels right, and that movement aligns with outcomes effortlessly. The outer world mirrors this inner calm by reorganizing without conflict. Stillness does not mean you will never feel emotion or thought. It means you are no longer dragged by them. You feel without identifying. You think without obeying. The center remains steady, and from that center, creation flows. Many people mistake inner stillness for passivity, but stillness is not inactivity. It is authority without noise. It is the confidence that does not need explanation, the knowing that does not seek reassurance. The world listens to this state when you stop trying to control outcomes and instead control your inner position. Life begins to cooperate. Circumstances soften. Resistance fades. People respond differently. Opportunities appear without struggle, not because you forced them, but because your state made space for them. Stillness is the womb of manifestation. It is where desire rests after fulfillment. It is where imagination has done its work and now releases the outcome to express. You do not hover. You do not interfere. You allow, and allowing is not weakness. It is mastery. When inner stillness becomes your home, checking reality loses its appeal. You no longer need confirmation, because confirmation is already felt. The outer world is no longer consulted for reassurance. It is trusted to reflect what has been assumed. This is creative power in its purest form, quiet, grounded, unshakable. From stillness, everything moves. Everything that appears solid, fixed, or just the way it is, was once invisible. It existed first as an inner acceptance, a quiet agreement within consciousness, before it ever took form in the outer world. What you consistently assume to be true about yourself, about life, about what is possible, does not remain an idea. It hardens into fact. This is not philosophy. It is the mechanics of experience. An assumption is not a wish or a hope. It is a position you take. It is what you return to when you are not trying. It is the background belief that shapes your reactions, expectations, and inner conversations. And because life reflects being rather than wanting, it is this background state that determines what shows up. Most people are creating unconsciously. They assume limitation, delay, struggle, or rejection without realizing it. These assumptions feel realistic because they are familiar. But familiarity does not make something true, it only makes it repeated. What is repeated becomes natural. What becomes natural becomes real. This is why changing surface thoughts rarely works. You can say positive words while still assuming the opposite. You can visualize success while assuming failure is more likely. The outer world listens not to what you declare occasionally, but to what you assume consistently. Assumption is identity. When you assume something, you stop questioning it, you stop defending it, you stop explaining it. It simply is, and that quiet isness is what gives assumption its power. It does not shout, it settles. Once settled, it begins to solidify. This hardening is not instant, but it is inevitable. Life rearranges through a sequence of natural events. People change, opportunities shift, circumstances realign, not because you forced them, but because they had to conform to the state you accepted as normal. This is why persistence matters. Not persistence in effort, but persistence in being. You do not persist by repeating techniques endlessly. You persist by returning to the assumption whenever attention drifts, gently, naturally, without anxiety. You assume again and again until it feels ordinary. The moment an assumption feels ordinary, it has already begun to externalize. Doubt only delays the process. When it becomes the dominant assumption, a passing doubt has no power unless you accept it as true. Feelings fluctuate, moods change, thoughts pass, but assumption remains unless replaced. You are not punished for doubt. You are rewarded for consistency. This is also why fighting unwanted circumstances rarely works. To fight something is to assume it has power. To resist a fact is to keep it alive. The wiser approach is to withdraw belief from it. You stop feeding it meaning. You stop consulting it for identity. You choose a new assumption and live from it. Instead, living from assumption means you interpret life differently. You no longer see delays as rejection. You no longer see silence as failure. You no longer see obstacles as signs to stop. You see everything as rearrangement, and that interpretation keeps the assumption intact. As the assumption deepens, your behavior changes effortlessly. You stop acting like someone hoping for permission. You move like someone expecting confirmation. Your tone, timing, and decisions align without conscious planning. This alignment accelerates the hardening process. Eventually, the outer world catches up. It must. Reality cannot remain inconsistent with the state you occupy. When the assumption is stable, the fact is unavoidable. This is why patience is not passive, it is confidence without anxiety. It is knowing that what has been assumed must appear, even if the root is uns. You do not need to watch the process. You do not need to manage the details. You do not need to convince anyone. You only need to remain loyal to what you have accepted as true. Assumption does not fail. It only reflects the state you are faithful to. Choose carefully, assume deliberately, live naturally, because once an assumption is held without resistance, it stops being an idea and becomes your reality. The outer world will always try to tempt you back into doubt. It will offer old evidence, delayed reflections, and unfinished. But remember, what you see is not a verdict. It is a shadow of a former state. You do not need to fix the world. You do not need to chase outcomes. You do not need to ask when anymore. Your only task is to remain faithful to the end you have chosen. When you stop checking reality, reality starts checking you. It reorganizes, it aligns, it moves quietly and naturally to confirm the state you are living from. So stand still within yourself, claim the end, rest in the knowing, because once you live from the end has no choice but to live through you. Thank you for being here and for choosing to listen beyond appearances. If this message resonated with you, carry it with you, not as motivation, but as a decision. The moment you stop checking reality is the moment your life begins to shift. Stay faithful to the